In the grand, brutal theater of war, history is written by the victors, and it is usually about the victories. We celebrate the T-34, the Sherman, the B-17, the mass-produced icons that defined the arsenals of nations. We assume these weapons emerged, fully formed and perfect, from vast factories, the product of committees, budgets, and sound, logical engineering. But war is not logical. It is a desperate, chaotic, bloody business. And in the field, where the theories of engineers meet the harsh, screaming reality of enemy shells, sometimes the right equipment is the wrong equipment. Sometimes the only solution comes from the shadows. It comes from the mud-caked, grease-stained hands of a man with no authority, no budget, and no permission. A man driven by pure, obsessive, mad conviction. Tonight we go to the blood-soaked Eastern Front, a place where the scale of destruction and the sheer volume of scrap metal created an opportunity for a different kind of genius. This is the story of an engineer, a man forgotten by the official histories, who took the wreckage of his enemies and forged it into a weapon, a hybrid monster, a tank that terrified the very Nazis who built its parts. This is the mad engineer who turned scrap metal into a tank that terrified the Nazis. Before we fire up that welding torch, if you believe that the real heroes are the ones who refuse to quit, the ones who break the rules to save their brothers, then I need you to secure this workshop. First, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It's the only way to support the channel and ensure you never miss these classified stories. Second, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this history matters. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're watching from. Our global community of history and hardware enthusiasts is the best in the world. All right, grab your wrenches. Let's get to work. His name was Senior Lieutenant Ivan Volkov, and in the autumn of 1943, his world was a sprawling, frozen, muddy field of mechanical corpses. He was not a tanker, not a hero of the line, but a technical engineer, assigned to the 5th Guards Tank Army's 29th Repair and Recovery Battalion. His job, his entire existence, was to follow in the wake of the great grinding offensives that were slowly, bloodily pushing the German Wehrmacht back across Ukraine. He was a man who lived in the boneyard. His world was the smell of welding smoke, spilled diesel, and the faint coppery tang of death that never, ever, left the inside of a knocked-out tank no matter how hard you scrubbed. Even Volkov was a man of numbers, of physics, of hard, cold, mechanical logic, and his logic was telling him that the war, as they were fighting it, was a lie. The Soviet Union was winning, yes, but it was winning through a horrific, brutal, unsustainable calculus of blood and steel. They were winning by drowning the Germans in numbers, by trading 5 of their T-34s for every one German Tiger. And it was Ivan's job to patch up the 4 T-34s that limped back, just so they could be sent out to die again. He was not a mechanic. He was, he felt, a mortician, preparing the next round of sacrifices for the altar of German technological superiority. The problem was the gun. The glorious T-34-76, the tank that had saved Moscow, the tank that had dominated the panzers of 1941, was now obsolete. Its 76mm cannon, a fine weapon, was a pea shooter against the new, monstrous cats the Germans were fielding. The Tiger, with its 100mm of frontal armor, and the Panther, with its 80mm of thick, sloped glacis, were immune. Ivan's boneyard was filled with the evidence. He would walk the line of shattered T-34s, running his hands over the scorch marks, the impact craters. He would see the neat, circular 88mm holes punched clean through his tanks from a kilometer away. But worse, much worse, were the T-34s that returned without holes. The ones that came back with their guns functional, their crews alive, but their spirits broken. The ones whose gunners, wide-eyed and shaking, would report firing 10, 12, 15 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition at a Panther, point blank, only to watch every single shot bounce. They would describe the sparks, the insulting clang of their shells shattering uselessly, before the Panther, in its own good time, would pivot, fire once, and turn their platoon leader's tank into a pillar of fire. Ivan, a man of physics, saw this as a personal, mathematical insult. He was sending men to their deaths armed with a faulty equation. He was polishing coffins. His madness, as his men called it, was one of obsessive, furious calculation. His small, cramped field office was a mess of chalkboards, scraps of paper, and scavenged German gunnery manuals, all covered in equations. Penetration values, armor thickness, angles of attack. The math was simple. The math was a death sentence. His commander, Major Klementiev, was a man of a different sort. Klementiev was a political officer, a Zampolit, a man of doctrine, morale, and quotas. To Klementiev, the T-34 was a symbol of Soviet resilience, a sacred icon of socialist industrial might. To question the T-34 was to question the state. "Lieutenant Volkov," Klementiev would say, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr, during their weekly readiness meetings, his clean uniform a stark contrast to Ivan's grease-soaked fatigues. "Your repair quotas are down. The front needs tanks. And you're wasting your time and your men's time writing these reports." He gestured to a thick, handwritten treatise Ivan had submitted, detailing the precise penetration failures of the 76mm gun against Panther glacis plates. "This," Klementiev said, his lip curling, "is not engineering. This is defeatism. It is your job to fix the tanks, Lieutenant, not to question their design. The glorious Red Army, under the genius of Comrade Stalin, will provide the tools of victory. You will provide the labor." Ivan's rage was a cold, hard stone in his gut. He was surrounded by the tools of victory, not just his own shattered T-34s, but German tools. His boneyard, after the massive, grinding battles around Kursk and the subsequent push across the Dnieper, was a treasure trove of captured, wrecked enemy hardware. He had the carcasses of Panzerwars, of Stugs, even a few prized, burnt-out Panthers and one Tiger that had been scuttled by its own crew, its chassis miraculously intact. He walked among them, his mind racing. He saw the superior, interleaved road wheels of the Panther, a suspension system that distributed weight perfectly, a masterpiece of complex, over-engineered brilliance. He saw the thick, intelligently sloped armor, and he saw the guns. The long, elegant, high-velocity 75mm of the Panther, the brutal, terrifying 88mm of the Tiger. And then he saw the other prize. In his captured artillery park, sitting in the mud, was an A-19, a 122-meter Soviet field gun, a monster of an artillery piece, a corps-level weapon designed to smash bunkers and level cities. It had been captured by the Germans, used against them, and then recaptured by a Soviet rifle division. It was a hero of the motherland. It fired a 56-pound shell, and its high-velocity, armor-piercing shot, Ivan calculated, his hands shaking as he scribbled on his notepad, could go through a Tiger's front plate like it was cheesecloth, from 200 meters. The idea that formed in his mind was not just unorthodox. It was not just mad. In the rigid, paranoid, hierarchical world of the Red Army, it was treasonous. It was a bolt of pure, suicidal genius. He stormed back to Klementiev's bunker, his calculations in hand, his mind on fire. He didn't just propose a fix. He proposed a monster. "Major," he began, his voice shaking with the sheer audacity of his own idea. "I cannot make the T-34-76 effective. The math is impossible. The gun is a failure, but I can build you a tank that will terrify the Nazis." Klementiev just stared at him. "I need," Ivan continued, his words tumbling out, "a new chassis. The T-34 chassis is too small, its turret ring too narrow. The KV is too slow, its transmission a nightmare. But the captured Panther, the one in the boneyard, its chassis is magnificent. The suspension is stable. It is wide. It can take the weight." "The weight? Of what, Lieutenant?" Klementiev asked, his voice now dangerously quiet, his eyes narrowing. "The 120mm, sir," Ivan said. "The A-19. I can mount it. I can take the shattered turret ring from the dead KV-1. I can build a new, fixed casemate, a superstructure out of the scavenged plates of the other Panthers. We can build a Zveroboy, a beast killer, a 122mm self-propelled gun on a superior German chassis. It will be an ambush predator, It will sit hull down, and it will one-shot anything they have. Give me 10 men, Major. Give me 2 weeks. I can build it." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Klementiev just stared. His face, which had been a mask of political boredom, slowly, visibly paled. He didn't just see an engineer, he saw a madman, a traitor. "Lieutenant Volkov," Klementiev finally whispered, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "Have you lost your mind? You dare to stand there and propose that we, the Red Army, copy the fascists, that we build a Soviet weapon on a Nazi chassis? This is groveling. This is an admission that their technology is superior." "It is superior, sir," Ivan roared, his frustration finally fatally boiling over. "The chassis is, and our gun is superior. Why not marry them? Why do we let our men die for pride, for a bad equation?" Klementiev stood up, his hand slowly moving to the flap of his Tokarev pistol holster. "This is defeatism, Lieutenant. This is heresy. You are a wrecker. You are a Trotskyite collaborator." He was screaming now. "You are suggesting we waste precious man-hours, precious steel, on this Frankenstein, this abomination. When the motherland demands T-34s, you are one step away from a tribunal, Volkov." He took a deep breath, visibly composing himself, the political officer regaining control. "Your madness has been tolerated long enough. Your idea is rejected. It is not just rejected. It is forbidden. You will not speak of this again. You will not think of this again. You will return to your station. You will meet your quota of repaired T-34s. You will send those tanks to the front, or I will have you shot." He pointed a shaking finger at the bunker door. "Get out." Ivan stood there, his own fists clenched, his heart hammering, the words of protest dying in his throat. He saw the absolute, unbending, fanatical certainty in Klementiev's eyes. He wasn't arguing with an engineer. He was arguing with a priest. And he had just committed blasphemy. He said nothing. He just snapped a rigid, sarcastic salute, turned on his heel, and walked out of the bunker into the frozen, gray afternoon. He walked past the line of T-34s, their crews waiting for their coffins to be polished. He walked past the TOC, past the mess tent. He walked back to his boneyard, back to his sarcophagus, the bombed-out barn where he and his men worked their magic. He stood for a long time, just looking. He looked at the beautiful, captured Panther chassis, its tracks still intact, its engine compartment miraculously undamaged. He looked at the long, graceful, lethal barrel of the 102 A-19 gun, sitting in the mud, waiting. He thought of Klementiev's threat. He thought of the tribunal. He thought of the firing squad. And then, he thought of the screaming crews of the T-34s. He thought of the insulting, useless spark of their shells bouncing off German steel. He turned to his own team of mechanics, the misfits and welders, who trusted him more than they trusted Stalin. "Comrades," he growled, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. "Tonight, we lock the doors. We light the torches. Major Klementiev, he wants T-34s. We are going to build him a god." The sarcophagus, the bombed-out, roofless stone barn that served as Ivan Volkov's hidden workshop, became a pocket of forbidden, desperate industry in the frozen mud of the 29th Repair and Recovery Battalion's depot. The first act of their treason was the heist, a feat of logistics and sheer audacious nerve. Ivan Volkov was not a fool. He knew Major Klementiev's eyes were everywhere, his network of political informers and sycophants woven into the very fabric of the battalion. To move a 45-ton Panther chassis and a 7-ton artillery piece in secret was madness. He needed cover. He got it, perversely, from the sky. A heavy, wet, miserable snowstorm blew in from the north, a blizzard so thick it reduced visibility to zero and muffled all sound under a heavy white blanket. It was a sign. Under the cover of this howling, icy gale, in the dead of a 3 a.m. darkness, Ivan and his 3 most trusted men, Misha, a master welder from Tula whose hands were as steady as a surgeon's, Sergei, a grizzled engine man from Stalingrad who could coax life from any dead piece of metal, and young Pyotr, a scavenger who knew the boneyard better than his own mother, committed their crime. They didn't dare use the M30 recovery tractor. Its engine whine, even in a blizzard, was too distinct. Instead, they used the brute, silent force of 2 cannibalized T-34 transmission winches anchored to the barn's foundation, slowly, agonizingly, dragging the dead, massive hulk of the Panther chassis across the 300 meters of frozen mud, its jagged, broken tracks groaning in protest, the sound lost in the howl of the wind. It took 4 hours, 4 hours of strained metal, snapping cables, and whispered, terrified curses before the dark, angular German shape was finally inside the sarcophagus, hidden from the prying eyes of the morning. Dragging the A-19 field gun was easier, but felt no less heretical. It was a holy weapon, a tool of the motherland, and they were, in effect, stealing it. By 0700, as the first, weak, gray light of dawn tried to penetrate the blizzard, the barn doors were sealed. A new, quarantine typhus sign was nailed to the front, a grim deterrent, courtesy of a sympathetic battalion medic who owed Ivan a favor. The sarcophagus was now their secret world, their forge, their cathedral, and their potential execution chamber. The paranoia was a physical, choking presence, thick as the welding smoke that soon filled the barn. They worked only at night, their world lit by the single sputtering blue-white hiss of Misha's welding torch, a sound they tried to mask by running a salvaged, mufflerless diesel generator at the far end of the depot. Every distant shout, every clank of metal from the legitimate repair bays, every unexpected footstep outside their door sent them freezing in place, their hands grabbing for their service pistols, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They were not just mechanics, they were conspirators, engaged in an act that Klementiev would see as nothing less than sabotage and collaboration with the fascist enemy. Ivan, consumed by his cold, logical fury, was a man possessed. He was the architect of this abomination, his chalk lines stark and white on the dark, captured steel. He was fueled by a diet of black, bitter tea, stale bread, and a relentless, burning image of the T-34 crews he had failed. He was not just building a tank, he was building an argument. He was building a 60-ton, steel-plated I told you so. The first challenge was the heart. The Panther's 700-horsepower Maybach V12 engine was a masterpiece of German engineering, a complex, high-performance, over-engineered nightmare. Sergei, the engine man, a man who loved the crude, simple, brute-force reliability of the T-34's V2 diesel, spat on it. "Fascist magic box," he'd grumble, his hands deep in its intricate guts. "Too many parts, too delicate. It is like a watch. You do not put a watch in a tank." But it was the only engine they had that could move this much weight. It was miraculously intact, shielded from the blast that had destroyed the tank's turret. But its fuel injection pump was cracked. They had no spares. A T-34 pump was a crude, simple thing. This was a high-precision instrument. For 2 days, the project was dead, stalled by a single, complex part. Ivan, in a fit of desperation, sent Pyotr back to the boneyard, to the carcass of the second Panther wreck, the one that had burned out completely. Pyotr returned hours later, a ghost covered in soot and ice, clutching the salvaged pump. It was half-melted, scorched, warped. But the core was intact. Sergei spent a full day and night in a frenzy of filing, lapping and cursing, cannibalizing parts from a T-34's pump, forcing the two philosophies to merge through sheer, stubborn will. On the third night, he hit the starter. The Maybach engine, fed by a jury-rigged Soviet fuel pump, sputtered, coughed a thick plume of black smoke, and then it roared to life. The sound was a deep, throaty, powerful rumble, a sound of pure, refined horsepower that was utterly different from the clatter of their own diesels. It was the sound of the enemy, and it was now their servant. They had to muffle it instantly, shoving sandbags against the exhausts, their eyes wide with terror and triumph. The beast had a heartbeat. Now, the surgery. Ivan's design was a masterpiece of battlefield expediency, a brutal marriage of the parts he had, not the parts he wanted. The Panther's turret ring was damaged beyond repair. This was a blessing. A turret would be too complex, too slow. He was building a tank destroyer, a fixed casemate, an ambush predator. He needed a flat, stable platform to mount the A-19. "Misha," he ordered, his voice echoing in the barn. "Cut it off." Misha, the welder, a small, quiet man with the eyes of an icon painter, looked at the massive, sloping glacis of the Panther. "Cut. What, Comrade Lieutenant?" "The roof," Ivan said, drawing a line in chalk. "All of it. From the glacis break to the engine firewall. We are giving it an open top, like a grill, but stronger." For 2 days, the barn was a hell of screaming metal and fountains of sparks. Misha and Pyotr, working in shifts, used their precious plasma cutter, a trophy in itself, to carve the massive roof plate off the Panther's hull, leaving a huge, gaping, rectangular wound. This was the point of no return. They had just destroyed a captured Panther. Klementiev would not just send them to a tribunal. He would shoot them on the spot. Now, they had to build the box, the Zveroboy's casemate, and they would build it out of the enemy himself. Ivan had them harvest the steel, the thick 80mm frontal plate of a destroyed Panzer IV, the side plates from a burnt-out Stug, the thick cast steel mantlet from a wrecked KV-1, a piece of Soviet steel to add to the mix. Ivan was an engineer, a man of physics. He understood one thing the Germans had mastered: sloping. "No vertical plates," he roared at Misha, as the welder prepared to fit the first piece. "Angle it, angle everything, make the shells bite, make them turn. I don't care if it's ugly. I care if it's smart." Misha, the artist, was forced to be a brute. He wasn't welding. He was stitching a monster together. The plates didn't fit. They were jagged, warped, pockmarked. He had to cut, and hammer, and curse, and then weld, not with the clean, precise seam of a factory, but with thick, ugly, overlapping scab welds, piling metal onto metal, 3, 4 passes, creating a hideous, bubbled scar tissue that was, in its own way, stronger than the original plate. They built a low-profile, sloping box-like casemate that replaced the Panther's turret. It looked wrong. It was a cubist nightmare of mismatched angles, a patchwork of German yellow and Soviet green, all of it scorched black by the torch. It was a bunker, welded onto a racehorse. It was terrifying, and it was empty. Now, the final act, mounting the God, the A-19, a 7-ton field gun, complete with its massive, complex, hydraulic recoil mechanism and a breech block the size of a man's torso. It was never, ever, designed to be put in a tank. Its recoil was so violent, it was designed to be staked to the earth. Ivan knew that if he just bolted it to the Panther's floor, the first shot would rip the gun out of its mounts and send it flying out the back of the casemate. He had to dissipate that force. The entire tank had to become the recoil system. His design was a stroke of mad genius. He didn't just mount the gun. He integrated it. He and his team spent 3 sleepless nights fabricating a massive internal cradle, a spider web of scavenged I-beams from a destroyed railway car, and steel plates. This cradle was welded not to the thin floor, but directly to the massive, load-bearing sidewalls and torsion bar housings of the Panther's chassis. The gun was then mounted into this cradle. When it fired, the recoil wouldn't just push on the mantlet, it would be distributed across the entire 45-ton mass of the vehicle. The entire tank would lurch back, absorbing the blow. It was a brute force solution, and it was the only one they had. Misha then built the mantlet, the gun shield, out of the thickest piece of steel he had, the 110mm thick turret face of the dead KV-1. He cut a hole in it, and they fitted it around the A-19S barrel, a thick, ugly, rounded shield that gave the angular beast a single, glaring, cyclopean eye. After 14 days, 14 nights of ceaseless, frantic, terrified labor, it was done. The torches went silent. The hammering stopped. The Maybach engine was cold. Ivan, Misha, Sergei, and Pyotr, gaunt, their eyes raw, their uniforms blackened and burned, just stood back. They stared at what they had created. It was a monster. It was a bastard. It was a chimera of Soviet and German steel, a bunker welded to a Panther's hull, armed with a gun that belonged on a battleship. The 122mm barrel was so long it stuck out an insane 20 feet from the casemate, its massive double-baffle muzzle brake looking obscene, arrogant. It was the ugliest, most frightening, most unbalanced-looking thing any of them had ever seen. It was a tank that radiated pure, unadulterated malice. "My God, Lieutenant," Misha whispered, crossing himself, a habit he'd never lost. What is it?" Ivan Volkov walked up to his creation, his hand touching the cold, massive barrel of the A-19. He thought of the T-34s, of their useless, sparking shells. He thought of the crews he had sent out to die. "It is the beast killer, Misha," Ivan said, his voice a low, trembling rasp of pure, cold fury. "It is the Zveroboy, and Klementiev. He wants T-33s. He will get this. He will get his. Miracle." The monster in the sarcophagus slept. For 2 long, agonizing, paranoid weeks, the Zveroboy sat in the freezing, absolute darkness. A 60-ton secret that felt heavier with every passing day. A physical manifestation of Ivan Volkov's treason. The blizzard that had been their shield had long since passed, leaving behind a hard, bright, frozen landscape, crisp with cold, where every distant sound carried, every movement was visible, and every shadow seemed to hold the shape of Major Klementiev. Ivan and his 3-man ghost crew, Misha, Sergei, and Pyotr, were shadows themselves, walking ghosts haunting the 29th Repair Battalion. They worked their normal, grueling 16-hour shifts in the legitimate motor pool, their bodies screaming with exhaustion, their hands raw from the sub-zero steel, their minds on fire, their every interaction poisoned by the colossal secret they were keeping. They were jumpy, irritable, hollow-eyed. Misha's hands, usually surgeon steady with a welding torch, now trembled slightly when he tried to solder a simple radio wire. Sergei, the grizzled engine man, became sullen and silent, drinking heavily from his private stash of vodka, his eyes constantly, nervously, darting towards the typhus sign on the distant barn door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Pyotr, young and less adept at hiding his fear, just looked perpetually sick, his face a pale, greenish-white. Ivan, their leader, threw himself into his official work with a frantic, manic energy, trying to be the perfect, obedient, quota-meeting lieutenant. He repaired T-34s at a record pace. He filed his reports in triplicate. He was trying to build a wall of normalcy, of mundane, bureaucratic competence, around the monstrous, revolutionary heresy he had hidden in the dark. But Major Klementiev was not a fool. He was a Zampolit, a political officer, a man whose entire career, whose very survival, was built not on understanding tanks, but on understanding men. He was a predator of the human soul, a connoisseur of dissent, a man who could smell the faint, sour scent of fear and disloyalty, where others smelled only diesel and mud. And he sensed something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He saw the repaired T-34s rolling out, yes, but he also read the battalion's meticulous repair logs, the logs he himself had insisted upon. He saw the missing Panther chassis, officially logged by Volkov as unrecoverable, chassis warped beyond repair, buried in mudslide. He saw the missing A-19 122mm artillery piece, logged as catastrophically damaged recoil mechanism, awaiting parts from Gorky. He saw the astronomical, completely unaccounted-for expenditure of welding rods, of oxygen, of acetylene, and, most damningly, of captured German steel plate that had been earmarked for patching T-34s, and he saw the way Volkov's three best men, his ghost crew, moved around the depot, their eyes hollow, their shoulders hunched, a tight, conspiratorial, jumpy clique of exhausted men who spoke to no one else and who spoke to each other only in whispers. He saw the typhus sign on the barn, a quarantine that had now, conveniently, lasted for 2 weeks, a quarantine for which the battalion medic had no official record and seemed suspiciously nervous when asked about. He saw it all, and his mind, a mind of paranoid, political calculus, put the pieces together. He didn't know what Ivan Volkov had built in that barn, but he knew it was something. He knew it was forbidden. He knew with an icy, cold certainty that Volkov, the mad, insubordinate, defeatist engineer, had disobeyed him. He came at dawn. The sun was just a weak, red, watery smear in the gray, frozen sky. The air so cold it felt like inhaling powdered glass. Ivan was just finishing a brutal 24-hour shift, his body a single, throbbing ache, his mind numb with fatigue. He was walking from the T-34 repair bay towards the mess tent, dreaming of hot black tea when he saw them. 3 figures marching, not walking, across the snow-dusted parade ground. Major Klementiev, his long black leather coat immaculate, his face a mask of cold purpose. And flanking him, 2 armed, blank-faced NKVD guards, their distinctive blue-banded caps a stark, terrifying splash of color against the white snow. They weren't walking towards the talk. They weren't walking towards the motor pool. They were marching, with a grim, undeniable finality, straight for the sarcophagus. Ivan's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face, leaving a cold, tingling numbness. He tried to run, to sprint, to get there first, to intercept them, to say something. But his legs were lead. He was too far away. He could only watch, in horrified slow motion, as Klementiev reached the barn door. The major didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He just looked, for a long, savoring moment, at the typhus quarantine sign. Then, with a theatrical, contemptuous flick of his wrist, he ripped it from the door and threw it into the snow. "Volkov!" His voice, sharp and clear in the frigid air, echoed across the depot. "Open this door!" Ivan ran, stumbling, sliding on the ice, his heart hammering in his throat. "Major!" he panted, arriving in front of the 3 men, his body shaking, his mind a roaring void. "Major, you can't. It's a quarantine, sir. The risk of infection." "The only infection here, Lieutenant," Klementiev hissed, his voice a low, venomous purr, his hand already on the flap of his Tokarev pistol holster, "is your insubordination." He nodded to the guards, who stepped forward, their PPSH-41 submachine guns clicking off safe as they aimed them, not at Ivan, but at the door. "Open it, Volkov, or we will open it with grenades." Ivan knew it was over. He could hear Misha and Pyotr inside, who had been asleep in their makeshift bunks, scrambling, panicked. The sound of a bolt-action rifle being worked. "No!" Ivan yelled at the door. "Comrades, do not shoot. It is the major." He turned back to Klementiev, his shoulders slumping, the fight gone, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. He was a dead man. His crew was dead. He slowly, his hands trembling, undid the heavy iron bar that sealed the door. He pulled it open. The heavy oaken door creaked, groaned, and swung inward into the near-absolute darkness of the barn. For a moment, nothing. Just a cold, dark, gaping maw that smelled of stale tea, cold steel, and German diesel fumes. Klementiev and his guards stepped inside, their eyes adjusting to the gloom. And then, they saw it. It was silhouetted against the one, dirty, snow-clogged window at the far end of the barn, a shape so vast, so wrong, so utterly alien, that it didn't seem real. The faint morning light gleamed, dully, off the long, obscene barrel of the 122 mm gun. It glinted off the sharp, faceted German angles of its patchwork armor. It was a beast, asleep in its lair, a 60-ton symbol of Ivan's pure, undiluted treason. The 2 NKVD guards gasped. An involuntary hiss of air, their hands instinctively raising their Peepsh submachine guns, their fingers tightening on the triggers, as if to ward off a demon. Klementiev just stared. His face, which had been a mask of triumphant anger, went chalk white. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, stunned shock. He wasn't just looking at an unauthorized tank. He was looking at a blasphemy, a heresy, an ideological nightmare. "Volkov," he whispered, his voice a dry, ragged hiss. "What, in the name of the motherland, have you done?" I built a solution, Major," Ivan said, his voice surprisingly steady, the terror of discovery being burned away by a final, defiant surge of pride in his creation. "You wanted T-34s. They are coffins. This is a beast killer. This is sabotage," Klementiev shrieked, finally finding his voice, his hand ripping his Tokarev from its holster. "This is treason. You have wasted state resources, precious time, on this monument to fascist design. You are a wrecker, a Trotskyite collaborator." He aimed the pistol, his hand shaking violently, not at Ivan, but at Misha, who was cowering behind the tank's massive track, his face pale. "You will all be shot, right here, you will." And then the world ended. It wasn't Klementiev's pistol. It was a sound so deep, so low, it was felt more in the teeth than heard, a rolling, rhythmic thump, 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 thump that made the very ground of the barn vibrate. It was not their own artillery. It was incoming, heavy incoming. Before anyone could react, the first shell hit. A 150mm Nadelwerfer rocket, the Germans' screaming Mimi, struck the main motor pool, not 50 yards away. The explosion was a deafening whoomp crack, a blast so powerful it blew the last remaining tiles off the sarcophagus roof, showering them in dust, ice, and splinters. The air was instantly filled with the terrifying, tearing silk sound of a full-scale barrage. Shriek! Boom! Shriek! Boom! The depot, the entire area, was being plastered. And then, the radio that Klementiev's aide was carrying, the one on the battalion net, burst into a chorus of pure, unadulterated screaming panic. "Contact! Contact! North flank! Panzers! Tigers! I say again, Tigers on the north flank! They are through the line! They are in the open! Red October is hit! Patriot is burning! They are rolling right over us! We are being decimated! Anyone, help us, for the love of God!" "Help us!" Klementiev was frozen. His pistol was still in his hand, but his face was a mask of stupid, blank terror. His world, his doctrine, his neat reports, his quotas. It was all evaporating in a hail of German steel just outside his door. The screams on the radio. They were the T-34 crews, the ones whose shells were bouncing, the ones Ivan had warned him about. He was paralyzed. Ivan Volkov was not. The sound of the Tigers, the screams of his comrades, it didn't break him. It was a clarion call. This was the moment. This was the reason. His madness had been a prophecy. "Sergei!" Ivan roared, his voice a thunder that shocked even Klementiev. "Zavodi, start the engine." Sergei, who had been hiding, looked at Klementiev's pistol, then at Ivan's blazing eyes. He made his choice. He scrambled up the back of the monster's hull, towards the driver's hatch. "Volkov," Klementiev shrieked, raising his pistol again. "You are disobeying a director. I will have you shot. I will." "Then shoot me, Major." Ivan roared back, scrambling up the hull himself, ripping his own Tokarev from its holster, not at Klementiev, but at the sky. "Shoot me after I stop them, or you can stay in this barn, write your report, and burn with the rest of us. Your choice." He didn't wait for an answer. He dropped into the open-top casemate, the cold steel smelling of new paint and gun oil. "Misha, Pyotr, ammunition, Get the AP, get the beast killers, load the gun. Just then, Sergei hit the starter. The captured Maybach engine, primed and ready, exploded to life, a deep, throaty, German rumble that was a profanity in itself. The entire 60-ton tank shuddered, the floor vibrating with a power that the T-34 crews could only dream of. The sound was so loud, so furious, it shook the dust from the rafters. Klementiev stumbled back, his hand over his ears, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. This thing was alive. Pyotr! Ivan screamed from the commander's perch. The doors, ram them now! Pyotr, who had scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the massive transmission into gear. The Zveroboy lurched forward, its massive tracks biting into the frozen earth floor. It didn't just open the doors. It smashed through them. The ancient stone and timber barn wall exploded outwards in a cloud of splintered wood, dust, and shattered stone. The Zveroboy, Ivan's mad creation, burst out of its tomb into the gray, shell-torn daylight, into the middle of the panicked, retreating battalion depot, a vision of pure, asymmetric German-Soviet terror. Its 120mm gun, long as a dragon's neck, gleamed in the firelight of the burning T-34s. The retreating Soviet soldiers, the men fleeing from the Tigers, stopped. They stared. What, in the name of all hell, was that? It wasn't a German tank. It wasn't a Soviet tank. It was a monster. And it was on their side. Ivan Volkov stood tall in the open casemate, the wind whipping at his face, his eyes fixed on the northern ridge, where the black smoke of the Tiger S muzzles flashed. He had built it. He had hidden it. And now he would hunt with it. The Zveroboy's eruption from the sarcophagus was not a deployment. It was a birth, a violent, screaming emergence of a new bastard child of war. The 60-ton machine, a grotesque chimera of sloping Soviet steel and the broad, high-tech Panther chassis, thundered out into the chaotic, snow-torn daylight, its captured Maybach engine roaring with a deep, guttural German rumble that was profoundly, terrifyingly confusing to every Soviet soldier who heard it. The men of the 29th Repair and Recovery Battalion, the men fleeing the depot, the wounded infantry staggering back from the line, all froze. They stared. They had been running from panzers, and now from the heart of their own depot, a new kind of panzer, one armed with a gun that looked like it belonged on a coastal battery, had just burst from a burning barn, its long 120-ton barrel casting a shadow like the finger of God. It was painted in a crude, patchy olive green, a Soviet star half-finished on its hybrid angled casemate. It was a monster. But it was their monster. Major Klementiev stood paralyzed, his Tokarev pistol hanging uselessly at his side, his face a mask of white, stunned horror, as Ivan Volkov's treason ignored him, pivoting its massive tracks in the frozen mud and accelerating with terrifying, unnatural speed towards the fight. Its engine note a furious baritone against the high-pitched screams of the incoming Nebelwerfer rockets. In the open-topped casemate, Ivan Volkov was a creature of pure, cold, crystallized rage. The freezing 20-degree wind ripped at his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't feel it. He was strapped to the commander's periscope, his world a magnified, bouncing circle of smoke, fire, and snow. Below him, Sergei, his grizzled engine man, was fighting the unfamiliar, high-performance Panther chassis, a machine with a power and agility he had only ever cursed. The tank slid, its tracks biting into the ice-slicked road, as Sergei, with a muttered oath, regained control, his skill as a mechanic translating in that moment to the skill of a driver. To their left and right, they thundered past the burning blackened hulks of their own T-34s, Red October, Patriot, the very tanks Ivan's men had patched up just days before, now just smoking, silent tombs. The sight of them, the smell of them, the smell of burning fuel and cooking men, banished the last lingering shred of Ivan's fear, his fear of Klementiev, of the tribunal, of the firing squad. It was all replaced by a singular, righteous, calculating fury. He had built this machine to answer this. This was not murder. This was vengeance. There, Misha's voice, the quiet welder, now a gunner, was a sharp bark over the engine's roar, his knuckles white on the crude hand-cranked traverse wheels. 9 o'clock! Panther! In the trees! He sees us! Ivan swung his periscope. Misha was right. Not 800 meters away, half hidden in a copse of shattered pine trees, sat a German Panther, its gun already traversing, its commander clearly visible in the cupola, staring in utter, slack-jawed disbelief. What was he looking at? It was a Panther chassis, he knew that. But the turret, it was a crude welded steel box. And the gun, Gott im Himmel. The gun was a Soviet railway cannon. The German commander, a veteran of Kursk, a man who had seen everything, was paralyzed by a single, fatal moment of sheer, uncomprehending cognitive dissonance. This was a tank that could not exist. "He's firing!" Pyotr, the young loader, screamed as a flash of orange erupted from the Panther's long 75mm barrel. "Incoming!" The 75mm shell screamed in, a high-velocity, tearing sound. But Ivan's physics, his mad design, held. The shell, striking the heavily sloped 80mm thick scavenged Panzervogel Glacis plate of the Zveroboy's frontal casemate, didn't clang. It screamed. A high-pitched metallic scree as the shell ricocheted, deflecting harmlessly up into the gray sky. A brilliant white scar of shattered steel and paint left where it had hit. The men inside the casemate felt the gong, a physical deafening blow that shook their teeth, rattled the spare ammo in the racks, and filled the cabin with the sharp smell of shattered paint. But they were unharmed. Misha's ugly welds had held. Ivan's slopes had worked. The Panther's shell, a round that would have punched through a T-34's turret like wet paper, had bounced. It bounced! Pyotr yelled, his voice a sob of disbelieving joy. "Comrade Lieutenant, it bounced!" "He won't bounce again," Ivan growled, his mind calculating. The Panther was reloading, frantically, but it wasn't the prize. His eyes scanned further up the ridge, and there it was, the king. The source of the radio screams. A tiger eye, sitting hull down, its massive boxy turret looming over the battlefield, its 88mm gun methodically, arrogantly, murdering their infantry who were pinned in a ditch. That was the target. The Panther was the guard dog. The tiger was the master. "Misha!" Ivan roared, his voice a thunder that cut through the engine's noise. "Ignore the Panther. Target. The tiger. On the ridge. Range. 1,000 meters. Armor-piercing. High explosive. On the turret face." Misha, in his gunner's seat, was fighting the massive, crude, hand-cranked traverse wheels, the recoil from the Panther's hit having knocked them off aim. The traverse was slow, agonizing. "I can't. It's too slow. The Panther. He's reloading. He's on us again." Another flash from the Panther's gun, another screaming, useless gong, off their frontal plate. "He can't kill us, Misha!" Ivan bellowed, his voice a roar of pure, maniacal triumph. "We are a fortress! Ignore him! Get the tiger!" Misha, his face a mask of sweat and determination, cranked the wheels, the long, 122mm barrel of the A-19 slowly, majestically, swinging past the Panther and settling on the distant, arrogant shape of the tiger. "Pyotr, loaded? Loading!" Pyotr roared. The 120mm A-19 used two-piece ammunition. It was a slow, agonizing, brutal process. He first shoved the massive 56-pound armor-piercing high-explosive APHE shell into the breech, a solid chunk of metal that took all his strength. Then, he grabbed the heavy, brass propellant charge casing, slammed it in behind the shell, and wrenched the massive breech block shut. "Loaded!" he screamed, slapping Misha on the back, his arm aching. "Mishka!" Ivan roared, using the affectionate name. "For the motherland! For the T-34s! Fire!" Misha stomped the firing pedal. The Zveroboy did not just fire. It detonated. It was an event of pure, elemental violence. The sound was not a crack. It was an earthquake, a deafening, ground-shaking, apocalyptic boom that was louder than the entire Nebelwerfer barrage, the muzzle blast, A geyser of white-hot fire and smoke 20 feet long momentarily blinded them all, setting fire to a nearby pine tree. The recoil was so catastrophic, so beyond anything a tank chassis was designed to endure, that Ivan's entire cradle system was put to the test. The entire 60-ton monster was physically shoved backwards 3 full feet in the snow and mud, its tracks digging deep trenches, the front of the tank leaping into the air, before crashing back down with a hull-shattering crunch. Inside the casemate, it was hell. Ivan was thrown violently against the steel wall, his head ringing. Pyotr was knocked off his feet. The air was a choking, blinding cloud of burnt propellant, so thick they couldn't see each other. And the sound. The sound of the steel hull groaning, screaming, reverberating like a struck gong, was unbearable. But Ivan was already scrambling back to his periscope, his eyes watering, his lungs on fire, desperate to see the result. He stared into the smoke. Did we hit? Misha? Did we? Misha was just staring, his mouth open, his hands still on the controls. He was speechless. Ivan looked again. The smoke was clearing. The Tiger was gone. It was not hit. It was not burning. It was gone. Where the hull-down Tiger had been, there was now just a pillar of fire, a roiling, churning geyser of black and orange flame, climbing 1,000 feet into the sky. The 122 mm Mapchi shell, a round designed to kill concrete bunkers, had struck the Tiger's 100 mm turret face. It had not penetrated. It had shattered it. It had cracked the armor plate open like an egg, and the massive, high-explosive filler had detonated inside the turret. The entire 57 tons of ammunition and fuel inside the Tiger had gone up in a single, catastrophic, sympathetic detonation. As they watched, the Tiger's massive, 12-ton turret, which had been blown straight up, came crashing back down to earth, a quarter-mile away, a smoking, twisted piece of scrap. One shot, one kill. Even Volkov, the mad engineer, had just vaporized a Tiger tank. The battlefield went silent. The German artillery stopped. The screams from the radio stopped. Even the Panther, the one that had been plinking uselessly off their armor, had stopped firing. Its crew, its commander, they had just witnessed this patchwork abomination. This Panther on the wrong side. Fire a gun that didn't exist, and delete a Tiger from reality. They were, in that moment, paralyzed by sheer, uncomprehending terror. This was a weapon that should not be. This was a ghost. This was a Zvero boy. Pyotr! Ivan's voice was a hoarse croak, his throat raw. Reload. The next 30 seconds were the longest of their lives. The Panther crew, snapping out of their shock, knew they had to kill this thing. They fired again. Gong. Another useless spark off the sloped casemate. They were desperate now, just throwing steel, hoping for a lucky shot. A jam. A miracle. Loading! Pyotr roared, already wrestling the next 56-pound shell into the smoking breach. Up! Misha! Ivan bellowed. The Panther! Send him to hell with his friend! Misha traversed. The Panther was now panicked, its driver trying to reverse, to get back behind cover. It was too late. Target acquired! Fire! Boom! The world shook again. The second recoil almost as violent as the first. The suspension groaning in protest. The shell screamed across the 800 meters. It struck the Panther's frontal glacis, the 80 min of sloped steel, which had laughed off the T-34s, was paper. The 122 mm shell punched straight through a neat, dark hole, and the tank just died. It stopped moving. A half-second later, a thick, oily, black smoke began to pour from the commander's hatch. A brewing kill. 2 shots. 2 kills. The most dangerous animals on the Eastern Front, destroyed in less than 3 minutes. The remaining German infantry, the ones who had been advancing with such confidence, seeing their invincible armor, support obliterated by this thing, broke. They ran. They dropped their weapons and fled back over the ridge, fleeing from the monster. The attack was over. The surviving Soviet infantrymen, the men who had been cowering in the ditch, slowly stood up. They didn't cheer. They just stared at the Zveroboy as it sat there idling, its long gun smoking, a demon that had just saved them. Ivan Volkov, shaking, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He hadn't even felt, looked back towards his depot. And he saw Major Klementiev. He was standing out in the open, in the middle of the burning wrecks of the T-34s, his pistol hanging limply at his side. He was just staring at the Zveroboy, at the two burning plumes of smoke on the ridge line, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated, world-shattering awe. Ivan's treason, his madness, had just crushed an entire panzer attack in less than 4 minutes. The battlefield went silent. The only sounds were the high-pitched, roaring hiss of the two burning panzers, the distant shocked shouts of the surviving Soviet infantrymen, and the low, powerful thump-thump-thump of the Zveroboy's Maybach engine idling in the frozen air. Ivan Volkov stood in the open-topped casemate, his ears ringing with a deafening metallic scree, his body a single trembling ache from the violent, bone-shattering recoil of his own gun. He looked at the devastation he had wrought, the two black, greasy pillars of smoke that marked the graves of Germany's finest, the 12-ton Tiger turret lying upside down in the snow 100 yards away. He looked at his crew, Misha, Pyotr, Sergei, all staring at him, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide and white with a kind of terrified religious awe. He had not just saved them. He had proven his insane, heretical equation correct. He was no longer a mad engineer. He was a prophet. He ordered Sergei to reverse, to pull their creation back from the front line, the tank groaning, its suspension protesting, its long, hot 120mm twin-turret gun still aimed at the ridge, a silent, smoking warning. As they clanked and backed into the shattered remains of the depot, the other soldiers, the mechanics, the supply clerks, the wounded, they just stared. They parted, creating a wide, silent path for the monster, as if it were a returning god of war, a pagan idol forged of German steel and Soviet rage. They didn't cheer. They were too stunned. They just watched, their mouths open, as this thing, this impossible chimera of enemy and ally, clanked past, victorious. At the pulverized entrance to the sarcophagus, Major Klementiev was still standing, his Tokarev pistol hanging uselessly, forgotten, at his side. His face was a waxy pale mask of shock, his political certainty, his entire worldview, shattered. He had been 30 seconds from executing Ivan Volkov for treason, and now he was staring at the man who had just single-handedly, in 4 minutes, annihilated a German armored assault that would have otherwise wiped their entire battalion depot off the map, killed him, and exposed the entire army flank. He had witnessed the T-34s, his T-34s, the symbols of his political faith, get incinerated. He had heard their useless shells bounce. And then he had seen this abomination, this monument to defeatism, fired twice and turned 2 invincible panzers into burning scrap. His rigid doctrinal mind was in a state of catastrophic failure, rebooting, trying to process a new, terrifying reality. Ivan, his hands steady, shut down the roaring Maybach engine, plunging the world into a sudden, profound quiet. He climbed, slowly, painfully, down from the hull, landing on the frozen, blood-stained snow in front of his major. He was no longer the pleading, desperate subordinate. He was the man who had the answer. He didn't salute. He just stood there, meeting Klementiev's wide, stunned gaze. My quotas, Major," Ivan said, his voice a low, cold rasp, the words hanging like ice in the air. "They are, adjusted, 2 T-34s, for 2 panzers. A profitable exchange, I think." Klementiev stared at him, his mouth working. but no sound coming out. He was a political animal, and his instincts, though momentarily shocked by the physics of his own survival, were already beginning to calculate, to spin. He was a witness to two things: a catastrophic failure of his command, the depot being overrun, the T-34s failing, and an unbelievable, unorthodox victory achieved by a man he was in the process of arresting for treason. His career was over, unless he didn't just bury this, unless he championed it, unless Ivan's madness wasn't treason at all, but irregular field expedient genius under his supervision, unless this monster wasn't a Frankenstein, but a prototype. Volkov. Klementiev finally whispered, his voice hoarse, his eyes darting from Ivan to the Zveroboy and back. You documented this? The design, the gun mount? Ivan just tapped the side of his head, his eyes as cold and hard as the steel behind him. It is all in here, Major. My calculations. My madness. Klementiev nodded, slowly, his mind racing. The politician and the patriot warring within him, and for the first time, the politician saw how the patriot could save him. You will stay here, he ordered, his voice suddenly regaining its authority, but all the ice gone, replaced by a new, frantic urgency. You and your men, you will not speak to anyone. You will repair it, reload it, and you will await my return. He didn't wait for a reply. He spun on his heel, his NKVD guards scrambling after him, and sprinted towards the battalion's long-range radio truck. He was not going to have even shot. He was going to steal his idea. He was going to present this prototype to the 5th Guards Tank Army Command, to Stavka itself, as a field-expedient solution developed under his own courageous and innovative directive. Even Volkov, the mad engineer, was about to be saved by the very political machine that had tried to kill him. The official report, Ivan would learn later, was a masterpiece of political fiction. Major Klementiev, recognizing the critical penetration failures of the 76mm gun, had authorized a special projects team, led by the talented, if eccentric, Lieutenant Volkov, to develop a heavy tank destroyer platform utilizing captured enemy chassis and super heavy caliber artillery. The Zveroboy was a resounding success, a new paradigm in anti-tank warfare. The story was, of course, bullshit, but it worked. Within 48 hours, a high-level technical delegation from Stavka, led by a hard-faced one-star general of artillery, was in their depot. They walked around the Zveroboy, which Ivan and his men had frantically cleaned and repainted in a uniform, menacing, olive green. They marveled at the captured Panther chassis. They whistled at the crude but brutally effective sloped armor of the casemate. But mostly, they worshipped the gun. They measured Ivan's internal recoil cradle. They ran their hands over Misha's ugly welds. They looked at the after-action reports, the sworn testimony of the infantrymen who had witnessed the Tiger vaporize. The general, a man who understood guns better than he understood politics, just looked at Ivan, his eyes full of a terrifying, cold, professional respect. "You did this," he said, not a question. "With scrap?" "Yes, Comrade General," Ivan said. "We used what we had." The general nodded. "You are a madman, Lieutenant, an absolute, irresponsible madman, and you are a genius. You are promoted to captain. You are being reassigned to Chelyabinsk tonight. You are going to show our factory engineers exactly how you did this." Ivan Volkov, the unknown mechanic, vanished from the front lines. His Zveroboy, his glorious bastard child, was deemed too unreliable, too non-standard for field use. It was quietly shipped back to the Kubinka proving grounds. A one-off, bizarre trophy, eventually lost to history, its Panther chassis and hybrid parts probably cannibalized for other projects. Ivan's name was scrubbed. He was a cog, a catalyst, not a creator in the eyes of the state. His design, his madness, was absorbed, rationalized, standardized, but the idea, The seed of the monster was planted. Just months later, the factories at Chelyabinsk, Tankograd, acting on the direct fury and inspiration of Ivan's design, began to produce the Soviet Union's own Zveroboy. They didn't use Panther chassis. They used their own, massive KV-1 and later Ion as chassis, but they mounted the same gun. First, the Su-152, and then the legend, the ISU-152, a monster with a 152mm gun that could vaporize a Panther, or a Tiger, or a concrete bunker with a single terrifying shot. But the terror Ivan had created that day, had a life of its own. The German infantry who had fled, the Panther crew that had survived, they told their story. A story that was so insane, so unbelievable, that German intelligence dismissed it. A Panther. Fighting for the Soviets? A Panther with a gun bigger than a Tiger's? A tank that could eat 75mm shells without flinching? It was a delusion. A ghost story born of combat stress. But the tankers, the men on the front, they believed it. They started to see shadows. They started to hesitate. Was that distant, low-profile tank a Stug? Or was it the Frankenstein tank, the Volkovoy, the Wolfman, the hybrid monster that could not be killed and whose gun erased you from existence? Even Volkov, the mad engineer, his name lost to the official records, had done more than build a tank. He had built a psychological weapon, a terror, a ghost that would haunt the Nazi Panzerwaffe for the rest of the war. Every time they saw a low-profile Soviet assault gun, every time they faced the beast killer that he and his men had forged from scrap metal in the dark.